Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Today we're going to be kicking the week off by taking a look at a new PC build here on the channel using the Ryzen 5 2600X CPU, one of the newly released Ryzen processors from AMD. And also stay tuned towards the end of the video where I'm going to be giving you the full details for a giveaway where you can win either the Dark Rock 4 or the Dark Rock Pro 4 from Be Quiet. But if you're, in a haste, you can always skip ahead to the end of the video or just click the Gleam link down in the description below if you want to go ahead and enter. It's got all the details over there as well. But as I said, we're going to be taking a look at a new PC build here. This is called my Zweites Leben build, the naming being German because so many of the parts in this system are in fact from the Deutschland, and also because it's a Ryzen second generation, so kind of the second life here for Ryzen from AMD, so Zweites Leben it is. So that's the system we're going to be taking a look at here. We're going to go over all the different parts used in the system. We'll be taking a look at benchmarks with the 2600X versus the 2700X, which we already looked at on the channel, and discussing kind of gaming performance, which one is really worth it for gaming, video editing also as well, which is certainly of importance to me. But we're going to start off just by taking a look at the build, going over the parts, and discussing some of the pros and cons, if there are any, on the different parts used here in this system. And we'll kick things off with the case, which is the Dark Base 700 mid-tower chassis from Be Quiet. This is actually the second time that I've built in this case. It is a fairly high-end chassis. It comes in at $180, but it kind of checks all the bells and whistles that you would want for a case at that price point. It's got the tempered glass side panel on it. It's even got RGB illumination on the front panel as well as the front 2 feet of the case, which you can adjust the colors of using a button right on the front I/O, and it's just a quality case all the way around. It's built like a friggin' tank. I also like some of the changes from the Dark Base 900 that they've instituted into this build here, one being the full-length power supply cover, which the Dark Base 900 does not have, and also the covers over where the hard drive sleds would go. Now, of course, you can pop these out and put in hard drive sleds if you want to, but if you're not planning to take advantage of them, or even just some of them, it's nice to have these covers that just kind of makes the entire build look really clean if you don't have them populated with a bunch of vacant hard drive sleds. So those are two additions that I really liked seeing here on this case from Be Quiet. The only real gripe that I have with this case is that I wish there was just a couple more millimeters of space between underneath the motherboard where the cutout is there, where you can run some of your front panel connectors. The main cable that gave me an issue with this system, as well as the system that I did in late 2017, was the USB 3.0 cable, which is kind of thick, and I was not able to get it underneath the motherboard. I had to run it through one of the grommeted cutouts, which isn't really the end of the world, but if I was to just really nitpick about one thing, it would be the space between the underneath the motherboard cutout, which I just wish was a little bit wider to be able to run some of those thicker cables through there. Now, of course, you could pop out any of the power supply cover panels because it is a modular power supply cover, and you can pop out any one or all of the different covers on there, and there are some cutouts there if you do want to run the cable through, but then you are basically eliminating having the full power supply cover on the top and on the side, and that's just an aesthetic, decision you'll have to make for yourself. Personally, I'd rather have the full-length power supply cover and then just run the USB 3 cable through the grommeted cutout as I did. But if in a perfect world, like I said, I just wish there was a little more space there to run that cable through, but just kind of really nitpicking at that point. Now, as I said, we're running the Ryzen 5 2600X, which falls right in the middle of the new Ryzen family of CPUs. There is the 2600 as well, which comes in at $200, while the 2600X is $230. And for that, you're basically getting a CPU with an out-of-the-box overclock, which is probably going to be the way to go if you don't want to overclock your CPU for whatever reason, or if you just don't feel comfortable doing that, then I would say get the 2600X. If you do feel comfortable overclocking, then get the 2600, save yourself some $30 and invest that money into a good cooler like the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 that we're going to be using here in this system. And when it comes to the 2600X, we're going to be getting to all those performance numbers later in the video and discussing whether or not the 2700X is worth spending the extra $100 on versus the Ryzen 5 processor that I'm using here in this system. Now, as I said, we're using the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4, which just recently came out. It's got a lot of nice improvements over the previous generation as far as mounting the cooler is concerned, and it does its job. It's able to cool the processor quite well. You'll be seeing some gameplay here of an extended play session that I did for about 30 minutes on Far Cry 5, and the CPU was staying around low to mid-60s on the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4, which is also just a gorgeous looking cooler. I saw some people on the previous videos saying, no, well, you can get a Noctua cooler, and maybe it's better by a few degrees here or there. I haven't done, extensive analysis. This is just what people are saying on the streets. This is the word on the street, as it were, and maybe it is a couple degrees cooler on the Noctua, but honestly, I would still personally get the Be Quiet simply for the aesthetics alone, because I think Noctua coolers are absolutely hideous. I think they're the ugliest computer part maybe ever made. They are just insanely ugly, and that's why I wouldn't personally use them in a system. I've used some of their industrial fans in the past in one of my systems, but those were the all-black ones, and having like the brown bumpers on them and everything like that, not an attractive look in my opinion. Personally love the monochrome look of the Be Quiet coolers, which is why I've used them in several builds in the past. Even when I was buying my own computer parts, I was buying their tower heatsinks to put into my systems because I love the all-black look, which is kind of a theme in a lot of the systems that I build for myself here on the channel. So yeah, Dark Rock 4 all the way versus the Noctua for me, just aesthetically speaking, of course, not in terms of quality of the cooling and all of that, but the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 is definitely no slouch, and it also happens to be whisper quiet, as you may have seen in that comparison video that I did with the Wraith Prism. Now, for the motherboard in this system, I'm using the Gigabyte X470 Gaming 7 Wi-Fi, which was supplied out by AMD along with the Ryzen processors this time around. And this is definitely one of the top-end motherboards out there in the X470 lineup, and I really like this motherboard. There were a few things that really stood out for me as why I liked it so much. First was the rear I/O, lots of connectivity on there. If you come around the backside and take a look at that, we've got a clear CMOS button on there, which I always appreciate having. We've got a power switch. You can hook up a Wi-Fi adapter, which comes in the box. Personally, I'm not using it because I'm running over Ethernet, but it's there if you want to use it. We've got 4 USB 3 connectors, followed by a USB Type-C and a USB 3.1. Then you've got your Ethernet and 2 USB 2.0 in case you need that for some devices. I know some audio devices don't really play so nice with USB 3, so nice to have some USB 2 ports on there. Then we've got 2 more USB 3 below that, and then all of your audio connectors, including a fiber optic out, if you're wanting to use that for any of your audio devices. And also the rear I/O on this actually had a fixed I/O cover, which I've never personally seen on a motherboard before. Usually you have to kind of pop them into your case and then line everything up. This one had the rear I/O actually completely fixed and attached to the motherboard, and I just really hope that becomes a trend moving ahead in the future. And the last feature on this motherboard, which I really liked and which I kind of think makes it worth the $240 price tag, is that it has proper heat sinks on the VRMs here. They are just gorgeous looking heat sinks on the VRMs, and they are just proper ones. They're not like those cheap little attachments that just kind of get glued on with thermal adhesive. These are proper heat sinks, and I really like that Gigabyte has done that since this is a $240 motherboard. They do have the $180 Gaming 5 Wi-Fi, which is pretty close in comparison to the Gaming 7, but you're not getting the heat sinks. And then you've also got the X470 Ultra Gaming motherboard at the low end, which is $140, and I'm sure both of those boards are perfectly adequate at running these processors, but the extra $100 to me personally would be worth it for the additional connectivity on the Gaming 7 board. Also nice to have the Wi-Fi in case you need to use it, but the Gaming 5 also has that at $180, and then like I said, the heat sinks over the VRM really kind of just makes this one worth the $240 to me personally, as this is a high-end build. This is not a cheap build. The whole build comes together at around $1,900, so it's not using low-end parts really anywhere inside of this system. If you're doing a more budget-oriented build, then it would probably make more sense to go with the $140 option, but when you're out there, you're spending $180 on a case and, getting a graphics card like the GTX 1080 that I'm using here in this system, it kind of makes sense to get the little bit higher-end parts, and that's personally what I would do if I was putting together a system with as nice of parts that we have in here, it makes sense to get a good motherboard to kind of go along with that. Now for the RAM here, I'm using G-Skill Sniper X, which is a 3400 megahertz kit of RAM. This was also supplied out by AMD along with the reviewer's kit for the new Ryzen processors, and it is definitely some fast RAM, and it runs really well with the Ryzen CPUs. There can be some RAM compatibility issues with XMP, but I can tell you just from testing it and using it that this particular RAM kit works at 3400 megahertz just by enabling the XMP. You don't need to do any other tweaks on the timings or anything like that. It just works right away straight out of the box. So that's something to consider, as RAM speed is important when it comes to Ryzen processors, but I haven't been able to find this right now. It's not available over on Newegg, and a 16 gigabyte kit like the one that I'm using here in this system is going to run you around $200 to $250, unfortunately, in the current market. So I would probably steer people towards a 3000 megahertz kit of RAM, which is still going to be very good. The faster the RAM you get, the better it's going to be. But 3000 megahertz is kind of the sweet spot right now, and you can find those online for around $200 to $215. Still easily double what the RAM prices realistically should be, but that's just kind of the world we live in right now, and that's true with the graphics cards as well, although prices on those are starting to normalize. I was running a GTX 1080 Founders Edition in this system, but if you go over on Newegg, they actually have quite a few different variants available. They've got one from MSI and EVGA, both selling right now for $620, which is not awful. That's pretty close to the original MSRP from when these cards first came out. Now, there was a price drop right after the 1080 Ti came out, so GTX 1080s should be around $499 for like the reference models, and then aftermarkets maybe $20 to $30 to $50 above that. So seeing these at $620 is certainly signs that the prices are starting to come down. And if you've got an itchy trigger finger and you want to get a graphics card right now, this might be a decent time to buy, unless you can wait it out a little bit longer. And the latest rumors are also saying that NVIDIA will release their new Turing cards towards the end of summer, so that's another thing you could possibly wait for if you're patient. But the graphics card prices are certainly starting to normalize, as $620 is a lot better than what these cards were selling for a month or two ago when they were up around $1,000. So it's definitely getting better, but it's not perfect just quite yet. Now, the last parts in the system I'll mention is that I am running a Be Quiet power supply also. It's the Straight Power 11 850 watt. It is fully modular, and the one thing I really like about it is that it's got nice black cables. It doesn't have any of those ketchup and mustard cables like you see on some power supplies out there, so I didn't even really see a need to go ahead and get sleeved cables, because I think it looks pretty damn clean just the way that it is. And I'm also running an additional one of their Silent Wings fans. The case did come with 240 millimeter fans, one in the front and one in the back, but I threw an additional one in there in the front as well to kind of help with the airflow, pushing it through the chassis. And then for SSD, I'm running a 480 gigabyte Corsair SSD, which runs for about $175 over on Amazon if you want to pick one of those up. If you wanted to save yourself money in the system, that's another area you can kind of shave some money off. Go with like a 256 gigabyte SSD for around $100, throw in a 2 terabyte mechanical drive, and call it a day. Now, as I said, the full cost on that system comes in at around $1,900, but this is a pretty top-end system. Running a GTX 1080 and a 6-core 12-threaded Ryzen CPU is definitely on the higher end of things, and I wanted to take a look at the 2600X compared to the 2700X, because you're looking at a $100 price difference between those two different processors from AMD, and the conclusion I can come to right now, spoiler alert, is that if you are trying to pick up one of these processors solely for gaming, and you're not interested in streaming or video editing or doing work in Blender or Photoshop or anything like that, get the 2600X or the 2600 if you can overclock it yourself. If you don't want to overclock it, get the 2600X. If you are doing video editing and things along those lines, then go the 2700 or 2700X route. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the gaming benchmarks now and see the difference between the 2600X and the 2700X, and it is really close. We're talking within a few frames here on all of the different games tested here at stock speeds. I tested at stock because my 2600X has virtually no overclocking headroom whatsoever, and the 2700X can only get about an additional 100 megahertz on it. So AMD has really pushed these processors as far as they could go, and that is why we're seeing such close numbers in the average FPS, is because they're both running around 4.05 to 4.1 gigahertz on either of the different processors, which fluctuates when you're running it even at stock. So yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at there as far as the numbers between the two different CPUs. So if you're getting it for just gaming, get the 2600X. I'll go ahead and throw up the 1% lows now, where you can see once again the numbers are virtually identical between the two, just coming in between just a couple of frames, like 2 to 5 FPS is pretty much the average on what you're seeing in all of the different games that I tested. And playing around in any of the games that I tested here, like Battlefield 1, Far Cry 5, Rainbow Six Siege, you'll see that as well. The 2600X is perfectly capable of keeping up with even a high-end GPU like the GTX 1080 when tested here at 1080p on high settings. And of course, if you get into 1440p and 4K, you're only going to be finding yourself even more GPU bottlenecked long before you find yourself into a CPU bottleneck. So that's why I haven't bothered to test the higher resolutions, is because at that point you're just dealing with raw GPU throughput and not so much the CPU. So that's why I tested at one set of settings and one resolution here at 1080p on high. So yeah, that really should be your takeaway from this, is that the 2600X is perfectly capable for just gaming. Now, when it comes to video rendering, which I do on a daily basis using Sony Vegas, I went ahead and did a comparison between the 2700X and 2600X, once again stock settings just like with gaming, and I did a 5-minute 4K render at 50 megabit per second with 2 video tracks, 2 audio tracks, and a transparent PNG overlay on the top throughout the entire 5-minute 4K run. And the 5-minute 4K video, like I said, at 50 megabit per second, the 2700X took 15 minutes and 19 seconds to render out, while the 2600X took 18 minutes and 52 seconds. So we're looking at about a 3.5 minute difference between the two different processors, which certainly adds up over a long period of time. You might not think that sounds like much. I mean, if you're only rendering videos every once in a while, then it's probably not going to be a big deal. But if you're rendering out large 4K videos on a daily basis, and I'm talking like 10, 15, 20-minute videos on a daily basis, that certainly begins to add up to the amount of time that you're sitting around waiting for videos to render over the course of, let's say, a year, if you're doing full-time production work. So if you are doing something full-time with video production or animation or anything like that, if you're a YouTuber, let's say, like myself, then grab yourself the 2700X and do yourself a favor. And yeah, just that's the way I would certainly choose to go if I was doing video editing. But the 2600X can certainly keep up as well. It can do it. It's just going to be a bit slower. If you're more concerned with gaming than the multi-threaded workload side of things, then go with the 2600 or 2600X, like I said a couple times now. So yeah, hopefully that kind of drives it home for you if you were on the fence about which one of these processors you wanted to pick up. But I think that's going to wrap it up for the look at the Zweites Leben build here. As I said, it's about a $1,900 system, so fairly high-end. If you want links to any of the parts that you're seeing here in this system, be sure to check out the links down in the description below, where you can pick up any of the parts from either Newegg or over on Amazon. You know, shop around, see which one happens to be cheaper for your region, and, you know, when you're picking them up and all of that. Now, as I said at the start of the video, we are going to be giving away a Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 as well as a Dark Rock Pro 4. If you didn't enter already, there's going to be a Gleam link right down at the top of the description where you can enter to win one of those, and those are being supplied out directly by Be Quiet, so huge thanks to them for supplying a couple of coolers here to give away to the viewers here on the channel. Unfortunately, this is being limited to just the US and Canada only. This isn't, you know, my giveaway. I'm not giving these away myself. But Be Quiet said they can only do it for USA and Canada, so that is where we are being limited to here for the giveaway. So sorry to any of the global viewers out there that are outside of the North America region. I'll have to get you guys next time on a future giveaway. But yeah, for anyone in the US and Canada, if you want to enter, the giveaway is going to be running for about a week. I'll announce the winners next Tuesday here on the channel. So 1 week from today, I'll be doing a video and I'll announce who happened to be winning the coolers, as well as you'll be contacted by me by email, and also probably by Be Quiet, as well as they'll be actually sending the coolers out to the given winners But yeah, that's all the details I feel you need to know. If you want any additional entry options, they'll also be there as well over on Gleam, so you can do things like follow me or be quiet on Twitter or Instagram to get yourself a few additional entries. But the only mandatory one is that you do have to be subscribed to my channel. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please let me know your thoughts on the entire system and the benchmarks and everything down in the comments below. I look forward to our discussion as always. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, don't forget to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you're not already. And if you have been here for a while, you can always hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of content here on the channel. And I will see you tomorrow for another video. Ta-ra.